All right. What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of FitBizU. I'm your host, Jill Coleman, and today we have another interview. Can you guys believe it? 2 interviews in 2 weeks. Normally, I'm too greedy to share the mic, but I am excited to have someone. We have a second timer on the podcast today, Brandon Lucero, who you guys maybe listened to his first episode. I think it was about maybe 9 or 10 months ago. We'll definitely link it in the show notes. And when I think of Brandon, I think about messaging. And this is a new term, which we talked about a lot last time. So we'll kind of just get into historically what this kind of switchover has been and how this concept of messaging not only is way more important now than it ever has been, but like what it is exactly and what people mean when they say that. And then specifically, we're going to get into launching today. I know this is a hot topic around my students. I'm sure it is around yours as well. And you have a free experience coming up called Master Your Conversion Messaging. So I've been seeing you on social media, lots of content around the concept of conversion. At the end of the day, that's what we need. We need for free people to convert into paid people, no matter what the sales mechanism is. And I know that messaging is a huge piece of that. So welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited for this conversation and I appreciate you having me back.
Yeah, for sure. So, like, tiny little background of how you arrived at this concept of messaging. And did you invent it? Did you invent messaging? Like, tell me a little bit about the history of like how we got to this, because people throw this word around all the time. I talk about a lot of my students, and whenever they don't have a launch that goes well, they always say, I know it's my messaging. I know it's my
Yeah.
messaging.
Yeah. Well, so the quick version of my story is basically like I got started in this business about 11 years ago. And I started selling real estate videos to real estate agents. And then that led me to then realizing that was a hard sell, but it was an easy sell when I taught them how to rank the videos. And then that led me to teaching video SEO and all that stuff. And then meeting our mutual friend and mentor, James Wedmore. Him and I partnered on a business from there. And then from there, I just started creating different products based on things that I was learning. And during that process, I remember one day James was like, I think you're really successful in selling all these different products because you know how to communicate. Can I hire you to help me change the communication in our video series? And he was doing, I think his launches were around $800,000 at that point. We rewrote his entire video series. And then his next launch did like $3 million or something crazy. And then ever since then, I was like, maybe I should just teach this. And that's what I've been doing for the last 5 or 6 years. And so when I got started, messaging was not a thing. Like it was not something that people knew. And so every time I talked about messaging, everyone's just like, okay, great. Like I would get no opt-ins, I'd get no traction. And that's when I realized it wasn't about messaging. It was about the problems that happens when messaging is off. I made that shift. That's when things started to take off. So I started talking about more around like how to create effective content and things like that. But over the years, we've done a really good job bringing the awareness to the space that messaging is a thing. And so now a lot of people are aware of what messaging is, but there's also a lot of messaging experts now that are also teaching it. But the problem is a lot of them don't really get to the depths of conversions, which is where the next focus of our evolution is going, because I don't think a lot of people really understand that this business that we're in, this online business, it's nothing but conversions. Everything you do is about a conversion. Every time you send an email out, you need people to convert. You need them to open up the email. You need them to click. Every time you put an ad out there, you need it to work. Every time you put a piece of content out there, you want people to follow the call to action, to watch, to click, to comment. Those are all conversions. And so the shift that we're making is like, how do we communicate, but also add value and drive the result or the conversion that we want? And that's our focus moving forward in 2025.
I love that. And when you said the word before you mentioned messaging, you said the word communicate. And I think at like its base level, like that is, but that's also a vague word, right? Like it's how you communicate. I'm like, what are you talking about, Brandon? I'm talking, I'm teaching. Isn't that communicating? So is messaging more like how do I, and I love that you gave all those examples of conversion, because oftentimes we think conversion means it's generating revenue, but you're like, it's harder than ever to get people to do stuff. It just is. To like open the email, to click on the thing. I have a client right now who's getting like 85% open rates to her lead list and no clicks, like not one single click into an email. So I would love to actually do a little bit of troubleshooting with you today, maybe later. We can kind of like, like what would you maybe share about messaging for something like that, or getting people to show up to a workshop, or increasing the show up rate for a challenge or something like that. So, yeah, go for it. Like what is messaging, or how do you describe it to somebody?
Yeah. So, in easy terms, it's basically how do we take your skills and knowledge and then translate it to the online world in a way that gets the results you want? And that's the biggest problem is everyone's very good at what they do, but you're like a college professor or something like that, right? You have a lot of knowledge, but the person that you need to sell to or that you want to be in your audience, they have 0% of knowledge. So if you start with where you're at, it's just not going to work. And so the biggest problem that people have is they just sit there and go like, well, I'm teaching and giving away my best stuff, best information, stuff I know can help people, but I'm not getting the results that I want. And so messaging is basically how do we communicate your skills and knowledge and how you can help people in a way that resonates, is relevant, and lands with them. So they watch, they click, they opt in, they show up, and they buy. And it's it's just like any relationship. We all know like if you're going to be in a romantic relationship, the way in which you communicate will literally dictate the results that you have, whether you're more connected or less connected, whether you're fighting or not fighting, or seeing each other's perspective or not, right? And it's the same thing with your audience. It's the same thing with your children. Like for me, I always use this example when I want my son to clean up his room. He has Legos all over the place. I could walk in there and say, bro, like clean up your Legos because I've asked you a million times, like clean the damn things up. And I'm probably not going to get the best response in the world, right? But if I said, hey, bud, like I know that you really care about your sisters. And if they come in this room and step on the Legos, it's really going to hurt them, like their feet, and could he possibly cut them? Do you mind if we like spend 5 minutes just cleaning up real quick so no one gets hurt? Like I'm probably going to get the result I want with that style of communication.
Mhm.
And that's what messaging is figuring out the right way to communicate your skills and your knowledge to the audience so that you get the result you want. And the way you communicate will change, whether you're talking about upfront content or an ad or an email or you're teaching on a webinar or you're on a sales page. And so most people have one style of communication through their entire brand, and it worked when there wasn't a lot of competition. But now that this market is so crowded, people are starting to see launches not working, content not working, things that used to work in the past not working, because everyone's saying the same thing. You have way more competitors. So we have to start to shift the way we teach, the way we communicate, and the way we do things. And so the short answer is messaging essentially is how are you communicating through the brand to get the results that you want.
Right. And the results could be an action item. The result could be buy this thing. The result could be take this action, join the Facebook group, whatever, all those things. So I'm trying to think back to because you and I have been doing this, both have been doing this a really long time. And when I worked with you, I think about 2 years ago, you helped us increase our launch revenue by 20%, just doing some of the small things. Up until that point, I had been doing what most people had been doing, which is getting people live on a call or live on a 2-part or 3-part series and just teaching my ass off. We kind of learned this concept of freemium, right? I mean, I'm in the fitness space. So like even the classic come to my gym, it's a free week at the gym, right? It's almost like try before you buy. And what I hear you saying a lot is like, look, sometimes you shouldn't give all your best stuff away. We hear this all the time. We're like, give all your best stuff away. You're showcasing what it's like to work with you. They need to see it. What do you mean when you say don't give all your best stuff away? Because if it's not that, then what am I posting?
Yeah. We want to add value, but most people need to realize that value doesn't mean just delivering information. So the example I always give is I could, if I wanted to give someone really good information, I could give them an encyclopedia, or I could have them attend a TED Talk. The TED Talk is going to drive way more engagement, way more probably mind blowing moments, ahas, just gives people a better, different experience with your information. And that's what's going to drive more sales, obviously more engagement, all of that stuff. Now, again, the encyclopedia can be on the exact same topic, but one's way more engaging because one is actually catered to or focused on how humans actually process information. And I started to make more money when I became a better teacher. And when I became a better teacher, I started to realize just pouring information on someone actually could be a really bad thing because there's 3 levels of trust that we need. But when we just dump information on people, we actually sometimes kill one of the levels of trust, which is they have to trust their own ability to follow our process. And if we just dump information on them and it's like almost overwhelming, what happens is they lose complete trust in their ability to follow our process. And we actually leave them in a worse spot. So, an easy way to overcome this is I tell people instead of teaching people how to do things, because that's what your product is for, that's what your consulting is for, that's what your coaching is for, teach them the concept of what they need to do. And when you can teach them the concept, what it allows them to do is see and understand how they can do it. But it also, what's going to happen is they're going to start to see how this specifically relates to them. And this is how humans process information. Like, or even you right now listening, I know what you're going to be doing if you haven't done it already is you're going to be taking the information I give you and you're going to automatically, without even thinking about it, start thinking, how does this apply to me? How does this apply to my business? How can I implement this? That's just going to be an automatic reaction, right? So your audience is also doing it. But when you teach someone a concept versus the how, it's 10 times easier for them to understand how they can implement the concept in their business. And it also increases their own trust in their ability to follow the process. And then that's where the magic starts to happen because they're like getting excited about doing it versus like getting, I don't know, overwhelmed, sad, or depressed of like, I can't do this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's almost like too much. And I do think that we do that, especially like you mentioned, as coaches and teachers, right? We love to coach and teach. So, instead of sitting with, and I do want to talk about this concept of like, pain points, because that's sort of a polarizing word. But, when we talk about like, no one likes that. It's like, we want to get in, we want to diagnose as soon as we want to know exactly what's going on. We want to start coaching them up and like kind of giving like this prescriptive like do A, B, and C. And I have definitely found that too in some of my students is they're just giving way too much all the time. And, as coaches, we love as fitness, especially we love the science, we love the hormones, we love the biochemistry, and we get into like, we're showing like textbook stuff and we're like, look at how amazing this is. And I've had to have some of my clients be like, all right, take all of that out. And I love that you said it's really about being a better teacher. I don't know about you, but in college, those professors who just like had like the most boring PowerPoints, I'm like, are we just reading off this? This is in the text, versus someone that's more animated, someone that has, has true mastery of the material. So you have to have the ability to use things like storytelling, analogies, examples. So how do you teach someone how to do that? Let's just say someone's getting ready to do a single workshop and they're like, all right, I'm going to sell on this webinar. And, I want to make sure that, yes, I'm giving value, but I'm also walking people towards a sale.
Yeah, great question. So I've been doing it on this episode already. And so, a quick example is when I use the encyclopedia versus the TED Talk example. That's a great analogy. So basically what I did is I presented a concept. We want to teach less information. And then what I did is I went right to what could happen, which is like you could overwhelm them. So I go into a very real, actual possible scenario. I go to the problem that creates. But then in order to teach the concept, I used an analogy, which was encyclopedia versus TED Talk. And as soon as I went into that analogy, what I'm assuming probably happened for some of the listeners was like, oh, that makes sense. I never realized that before. And then they got the concept. But that still leaves the how. Like, how do we actually do that? And when you can give someone this mind blowing moment, but then also leave this internal desire of like, I really want to learn that now, that's where demand is created. That's how you start to get people to feel like I just got a huge amount of value. You blew my freaking mind, but I also now I just really need to work with you. And so that's the magic of teaching concept. And like you said, story, analogy, metaphor, examples, all of these things are great ways to help that process happen.
This is so I want to dig into this because how do you teach someone how to think differently? Because that's really what we're talking about, right? It's to like recognize, is it really just I have like the thing I think it is, but like what would you say is like how do you get someone who's maybe been in their business for 6, 12 months and they're going, I understand that. That's a great idea, but I just know facts and figures. I just know tips and tricks. How can I create a concept? How can I tell a story? How do you even start to think of this stuff?
Yeah. So the first thing is it always boils down to problems. It's always going to boil down to problems. And then once we understand the problem, we then go into, well, what's causing the problem? And so for me, I'll just use my own business as an example here. I had to look at like, well, when people's messaging is off, what's happening? And the number one problem was, well, they're just teaching too much information. And they're basically, well, that's not even the problem actually. The problem was they're putting good information and content and they're not getting any traction. So they're just not driving any engagement. And then I had to ask myself, what are they doing that causes that? And that's the mistake. The mistake is they're teaching way too much information. So now that I know the problem, And now that I know the thing that's causing it, I can ask myself, what do they need to do? And that, to me, that is, well, they need to teach concept. And then I ask myself, okay, how do I get them to understand this idea that information, too much information is not great? Where else in other scenarios in life is giving out too much information a bad thing? And I was like, oh, like an encyclopedia. No one wants to read an
Mm.
encyclopedia. I
Mm.
was like, great. Well, what else where people aren't giving out information but get the result they want? Like a TED Talk, like that's perfect. And it doesn't have to be a TED Talk. I could have come up with like a best-selling nonfiction book or whatever it may be. Now that I have this other scenario in a different context that describes the same problem, that's when people will start to get it. Now, I know I just threw a lot of like,
No, that's great. No, this makes a lot of sense. It's almost like you have to reverse engineer it. And I was saying, because I try and use a lot of analogies and stories and stuff in mine, but oftentimes it's from just like clinical reps, like literally just working with a lot of people. When
yeah,
I was new, I did not have examples, right? But like over time, you start to be like, oh, that's kind of like this, and you kind of make the lateral connections, and you do start to feel like you become a different type of thinker. So you mentioned two things there. You mentioned a problem, and you mentioned a mistake. So from what I've learned from you, when we work together, these are some of the most important things that we need to know about our ideal client. And for a lot of coaches, they don't know that. They're like, work on your mindset. And the client is like, I just want to lose 20 pounds. What are you talking about? So,
yeah.
so how do we really understand our clients' problems, and how do we understand the mistakes that they're making?
Yeah, and that's I think is really important. Like you have to understand people are going to work with you or buy from you because they have a problem. They trust you to fix the problem, and if you don't understand the problem that they're going through, it's going to be really difficult to sell. So there's a couple ways that I like to do it. Number one, if you've gone through the journey yourself, like you are helping people with something that you are like you struggled with yourself, you just happened to your own experience. What were the actual issues you're dealing with? What were the thoughts, the feelings, the emotions? And you start there. But the key is we have to get specific. And what happens is when we get specific, we become more relevant. And because the marketplace is getting so crowded, the people that are actually struggling with launching now are the ones that are a little bit more generalized in their communication, and they're not getting specific. Because that's happening, the audience is seeing you as blending in or the same as everyone else versus being someone that's really relevant to them, their situation, understands them, sees them, makes them feel heard and validated. So we need to tap into that. So one way is tap into your own experience. Number two is just to ask people you're working with, but it's your job to understand that when you ask them, are they being generalized or not? So if you ask them like, hey, like, why did you sign up to work with me? And they go, well, I just wanted to lose weight. And it's like, okay, well, that's too generalized, right? So you need to ask a follow-up question. Well, how much weight did you want to gain? Why weren't you doing it? Well, I didn't have enough time. What was taking up all of your time? Well, I had kids and was really, really busy. Well, why didn't you bring your kids? Because we have a daycare here. Like just start really digging in deeper and then deeper and then deeper and then deeper. And the more you can do that, the more you're going to get to the root problem, like the actual real problem that's going on in their life. And then you can take that problem and you can turn it into like 15 different pieces of content. And that's a whole nother conversation, which we can get into on how to do that. But when we can create titles that come from a problem, but don't really highlight the problem, that's when we're able to get people's automatic attention without them feeling like we're throwing salt.
So this is good. What would be, using that example? Like I'm like, okay, Brand, I'm doing market research, and I asked my people, and they said they want to lose weight, or they said they were stuck, or they said they were overwhelmed, or they said they were frustrated. And so I just take that language and I put it right back on my sales page or right back into my sales emails. But using your example and using your sort of strategy where you like ask, but why you do like the 5 whys or whatever, right? You get to the underlying thing. Then how does the headline or how does the piece of content change? And now it's not, do you want to lose weight? Are you someone struggling with weight loss? It becomes what instead?
Right. Okay. So some of the questions I would ask, like if someone's like, well, I'm struggling with weight loss. Most people will say, create a piece of content says how to stop struggling with weight loss or something like that. Right. So my first question would be, well, who is it that we're working with? So this is tapping into identity. And they might say, well, I want to work primarily with like busy moms. And it's like, okay. So now just knowing that piece of information, we can change it to how busy moms can overcome weight loss or whatever it is, right? So now we're already getting a little bit more specific. Someone's going to read the two different titles, and if they're a busy mom, they're going to feel like this one's more relevant. They're going to go to the one that's using their identity. But then if we ask like, well, why does a busy mom really struggle with weight loss? And it might say something like maybe they're just too busy with the kids or something like that, or they just can't get daycare, someone to watch the kids to work out. So then we can change the title to how any busy mom can lose weight even if you don't have daycare planned or something like that. Now that title is going to speak so much more to that very specific person, where when they see that title, their automatic reaction is like, oh my God, that sounds amazing. I can lose weight and I don't have to worry about daycare. Because what we're doing is we're starting to tap into their subconscious, or what I call the decision-making part of their brain, where when they read that title, it automatically clicks to the fears, the worries, the concerns that are circulating in their head that they may not even really worry about, but they're going to have this automatic reaction of like, that's me. I need this. This hits all of my pain points. And then that's when we start to get those conversions we talked about, the clicks, the watches. But if you can take that style of communication and the style of teaching and combine those together, that's where engagement, not only is the title better and you get more clicks, but now the teachings are even more engaging, and you just keep people a lot longer. And that those two things combined with your content will drive more conversions. And then it's game over when you just do that throughout your entire.
Is it possible to become too niched and too specific? Because this is obviously a huge, fear, especially for new online entrepreneurs, is this idea of like, I'm going to cut everyone off, and then there's literally going to be no one to sell to. So what are your feelings about that? Can it be too specific and too tangible?
It can, but I also just want to address that being specific doesn't mean niching down at all. So the example I like to give, and I know everyone hopefully will relate to this, but like, how many of us have gone to the grocery store and we go into the produce section and there's those bags, right? They're either gray or they're green, and they're like super thin plastic, and you have to like lick your fingers and like massage the top almost just to open it up. And then you throw onions or sweet potatoes in there and they kind of go through the bag because they're so thin and they go everywhere. It's like annoying, right? And everyone listening, you all know what I'm talking about, right? You probably felt like, yes, okay, I get it, I understand. Well, that was me being very specific about a problem every single one of you have or have experienced. And that's the secret. Getting specific isn't what makes it narrow, it's the problem you choose. So if you choose a problem that 100% of your audience is going through and you just describe it specifically, you're not narrowing anybody down, and everyone finds it relevant. And the key here is it's about relevancy. It's about communicating so relevant to someone's actual situation, actual thoughts, actual mistakes, actual problems, actual desires and wants, that their subconscious or the decision-making part of the brain just automatically goes, that's me. That makes sense. And stand-up comedians do this all the time. Like, how
Yes.
many times do you guys listen to a stand-up comedian and you're just like slapping your partner next to you, like, oh my God, that's you, right? Like, they're very specific with their jokes, which is what makes them funny and relatable and relevant.
Yeah, I remember this. I forgot. This must have been like probably 10 years ago. I was at a business conference, and I remember the speaker, I don't know who it was, but he was like, the most specific story is also the most universal. When I tell a story about my dad, you immediately start thinking about your dad, right? And when I start talking about this thing in my business, you start. And so I love that, because I think that's the fear of like, oh my God, I'm getting so specific. No one is possibly going to relate to this. And what you just showed us is that actually probably 100% or close to your audience can relate to something when you're that specific. So I love that. So let's talk about where these things go, right? I know this is a big thing you're doing, especially in your upcoming free experience, which we have the link in the show notes for that. You guys need to, especially if you're listening to this and being like, this is exactly what I know I need to work on. You guys need to join Brandon's free experience. It is in the show notes, but I know this is a big thing of like, okay, now that I have these messages, now I'm like, okay, I'm specific, I'm tangible. James teaches us what's called the camera scenario, right? Can I picture that in my head? If I can picture it in my head, if I can picture someone doing it, chances are it's probably going to be specific and tangible. Where do these things go?
Yeah. And it can change from like where you are in your business. So for example, if I'm like running an ad, I want to be very specific on problem, and I want to be very heavy on identity. So usually be like course creators, because I want to attract course creators. If you're in the fitness space, it could be busy moms or busy CEOs or whatever, maybe whoever it is you want to attract. So we always like go really heavy with the identity, and it has to be the identity that the audience would say they are, not who you think they are. So there's a difference there. It has to be who they would identify as. Then you want to go right into a lot of like, are you dealing with this, like, and you want to be very specific on problems. And then you can go into mistakes and have you tried this, and this? And it's very just like, let me demonstrate that I understand what you're going through. Okay. So that's one way we can sort of do that. When we start to transition towards people coming now opting in and in our training, like on our webinar or something like that, you want to start the webinar off with the same thing, but we need to start doing something a little bit different. So once we start with the problems, like, have you been dealing with this, and this? We need to make the transition to the solution. So there's going to be what I call a bridge. And a bridge is now like, how do we get someone who knows we understand them to get them to go like, oh my God, I need that. And so the messaging will sort of change on the webinar. And so we have I could talk for 2 hours on how to do that. So it's an easy process, but it takes some explaining. And so, the easiest way to explain it is if you can start with the problems and then all of a sudden introduce the concept like we talked about, then back up the concept with metaphor, story, whatever analogy, that starts to get people to go like, oh, that makes sense. Oh, I get that. Oh, I need to learn that. And then when we get to like the sales page, for example, the messaging starts to shift a little bit to specific. Yes, we're going to start with specific problems, but we're also going to introduce specific outcomes, specific benefits, specific transformations, because now they're ready for that. And so when you look at the whole funnel holistically, you'll see it starts with problems, it introduces solutions, it shows proof of the solution, and then now we're in benefits. And that's what it really looks like. But most people don't look at it that way. Most people look at each one of those as an individual effort and they don't work together. And so what we're going to be talking about in a 3-day event is like, well, how do we get them to start talking together? How do we pull up the right things? How do we know what's going to work before we even go live? And that's a whole nother topic too.
Huge.
Like a lot of this messaging can be figured out before you even launch. So you know it's going to work before you even go live. But that's kind of a brief sort of example of how it would shift and change depending where you're at inside of the business.
I love that. And in the 3-day event, which you guys definitely need to sign up for sure, and I'm definitely going to as well. I really want to break down, if you're cool with it, break down sort of what I consider to be like, if we just get into launching, there's sort of like 3 parts of the launch. The first being lead gen, then there's like delivering the experience itself once you have people in there, and then open cart. So when it comes to lead gen, and obviously like we have like a lead goal or something. And what are some of the best practices that you're seeing right now that utilize messaging that is getting people, you had mentioned, especially on ads, like really connecting with the problems and mistakes. Same thing organic as well.
Yeah. So there's one style of ad that's working really well for us right now. So I'll break that down. And it's a concept that we use inside of our program called self-identifying. And what this is it gets the audience to self-identify that they have a problem. So instead of you telling them they have a problem, they come to their own conclusion. Oh my gosh, I have a problem. And I call it 5 signs. And basically what it is in ad copy is you will write something like 5 signs you have a problem as this identity. So for me, it'd be like 5 signs you have a messaging problem as a course creator, right? So it's like the identity and the problem. And then what I do is I then say number 1, and I just write out 5 different very specific scenarios that happen when your messaging is off. So I might write something like, you put out really great content, but no one engages with it. Number 2, it feels like people only really know how good you are after they work with you or see you live in action. So I just go, yep. And people go down this and they're like, that's me. That's me. And by the time they're done, they're like, I'm all of that. I have a messaging problem. And when you get people to realize, oh my gosh, I have a problem, the likelihood that they're going to sign up goes through the roof. So I've been really loving the self-identifying stuff with with ads. And that's also, we can also tap back into what we talked about earlier, which is the listing the problems and their identity and their mistakes. That works really well too. But that's how I would focus on lead gen.
Right.
Now,
Because
if
it's
you're
opening
doing,
up this loop, right? It's like it's the self-identifying. It's like, but there's no solution given. Whereas, it's not like this how-to content. It's like, oh, if you are struggling with these things, here's an action item. No, the action item is join the free
Yeah.
experience, sending people to the landing page.
And there's so many people online that are doing, like, on Instagram, this content's really popular right now. Like, if you the one person I really like watching is the holistic psychologist, because she has millions of followers, and she built, I would say 80% of her content when she built her business was self-identifying content. It was like, if you have like 5 ways to know
Signs you
you,
have abandonment issues.
yeah,
You're
abandonment
like,
issues,
yep.
or a narcissistic mom, or whatever
Yeah.
it is. And then
Yeah.
she
Yeah.
goes
Yeah.
through these scenarios, and
Yep.
everyone is left with like, oh my God, I know what the problem is now, but there's no way on how to fix it. And then when she opens up her program, it's like everyone floods in, right? And so that also works very well
Genius.
with organic. So if you could do 5 signs in paid and organic, it works really well for both.
Yeah, I love that. And I think sometimes this has to be kind of like not like trial and error, but like you're not probably going to nail it every single time. Like I've definitely done stuff like this that's like crushed with the many chat. And then other times it's like you get 2 responses, right? And so it's like, okay, maybe it's not specific enough. Maybe they're not connecting enough. Like, so is that how you teach your students? Is like the feedback is just the response, right?
It is. And that's, I mean, that's even for me, I don't know what's going to work before we go live. And so like right now we're generating leads, and we have like 30 or 40 different ads with like 6 or 7 different versions of copy, because we just don't know. And honestly, sometimes the ads that I didn't think would work great. And the ones that I thought were going to kill it and crush it just don't. And so you don't really know. But that is the hidden secret to messaging, is that the data will tell you what's working and what's not. And so when we go into a launch, I'm not guessing at the topics. I'm not guessing at the teachings or the analogies or the stories. It's all based on what were our best performers in our content, what got the best open rates in our emails, what podcast downloads got the most, or episodes got the most downloads. And then those all become what we lead with in the launch, because the data told us that that's what works. And the data is based off of our audience's behavior. Our audience behavior is subconsciously driven. So when we can tap into the data, we know we're getting what works subconsciously with our audience out of everything that we do. And let's just focus on the stuff that works. And then we tend to get better results in our launches because of it.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you mentioned the word, it's not a guess when you said that, because I think there's this misconception that business is just like so unpredictable. It's like, we never know. And it's like, well, you've seen things that have done well. So, or you even done a launch that like you nailed your messaging. Like, so don't start from scratch the next launch. You're selling the same offer. I think there's this misconception that like it needs to be different. People already saw that. And I'm like, well, they didn't buy it. So I need to see it again, or there's maybe tweaks we can make. So is that what you would recommend as like people start really understanding this stuff? It's not like we start from scratch.
No,
We just iterate.
when you have great messaging, it should literally feel like you're repeating yourself all the time. Like 70% of the time, it feels like you're repeating yourself. Like the amount of times I've used the encyclopedia and TED Talk thing over the last like 2 years, I don't even know. Like if I had $1 every time I use that, I would just be retired. So you use it all the time. I use it all the time. So you want to repeat yourself all the time. We came up with a new offer last year. I think it was last year, or maybe 2 years ago. And I didn't know how to sell this thing. And so I went to my data and I did the best I could, but we ended up doing the webinar for 24 weeks in a row. So I did the same webinar 24 times, 24 weeks in a row. And what I did is everyone that registered for the first one got invited to the second one. Everyone who was on this invited to the second one. And we just kept inviting people back and back and bringing in new traffic. And there were people that were literally there 5 to 6 weeks in a row. I recognized their names. And I ended up just saying like, Barb, why are you still on like book a call? I'm like, my God. But really what I wanted to know is, why are you on this thing for 6 weeks in a row? And what I realized, what they told me, was that I still have the problem. I'm still struggling with the thing that the webinar is going to help me with. I'm not able to figure it out on my own. I'm like, then maybe you should get into the program. Like you need more help. Like, yeah, the webinar is going to help and it's going to speed things up, but like some people need more help, like, and people want results faster. So what I realized is that I've always heard people sometimes need to go through the launch 2 or 3 times before they buy. And that's not necessarily, it is, but not necessarily true. Really what it is, what we found out is that people need to know they have the problem. They need to know you have the solution and say no to it 2 or 3 times before they finally say yes. And so people were coming back to the teachings over and over again. And they would tell me, Brandon, I'm learning something new every time, because they hear it differently every time. their awareness changes every time. They're becoming more educated, so they hear things differently. They understand things differently. But then when you combine that with, I know I need this, and I've said no 3 times, they finally started to say yeah. So by week 5 and 6 and 7, it started to become really fun because we started to get a lot more booked calls, a lot more sales. And sorry, I don't even remember what your original question was, but we we realized that that was a very key thing.
Yeah, I mean, the question was, and you answered it, which was, is it okay to continue using messaging that is proven? Like, it's like, yes. And I don't think I told you this, but we did our biggest launch ever this past September for our signature offer. And we do like a first 5 bonus. So, like, the first 5 people purchase, 3 out of the first 5 people literally didn't know me before the launch. They came in from an ad, cold, first 5 people, 3 of the 5. So that was really cool for us, because then that's an indication that, like, yes, we have gotten to the point where cold messaging, we're doing better with cold messaging, right? And so they don't need to have this big relationship with me reading my shit for like years. Like, they come in, they get what they need, they see me as that trust agent who can deliver that, the program can deliver that. And so that was a really big thing for us with
Well,
messaging too.
it's great too because, like, so some people will say, like, it takes someone a year to get to know me, and it's like, yeah, but it's not because it's a year. It's because it took you a year to deliver the elements to build that trust. And if you know what those elements are, you can be super intentional with it so that it can happen in a week or in one launch or whatever. And that's where you're at now. And that's the goal, like, to be able to get cold traffic, to be able to trust you to that level within a week instead of a year takes time and practice. And by the way, when we did that webinar 24 times, it wasn't the same thing. We were always making tweaks and changes. I wasn't just throwing it all in the trash can and starting over, right? We were fine tuning it to get it to a point where it was just converting. And you did the same thing from launch to launch to launch. It's like fine tune, fine tune, fine tune. What are we going to be intentional with to build that trust and conversion a lot faster? And that's what happens is when you're able to get that done.
And I love that. And one of the things that I learned from you when you helped me with my messaging for our signature offer was, I had I had been telling my story, and it was taking me like 15 to 20 minutes, and I was telling my story, and I was telling it like really in depth, so people were connecting with it. But one of the things you said to me was like, you do not need to be telling your story, like, really at all. And I was like, what do you mean, Brandon? They need to know me. They need to know I understand them. And I need to like tell them the entire origin story. And we like took that out and instead just dropped tiny little relevant stories throughout the teaching portion and throughout the messaging. And it worked really well. But I see this all the time. People spend 20 minutes on their own story. Why does that not necessarily work? You would think it does. You're like, oh, well, they're connecting with me. They're seeing me as smart, qualified, my credentials.
Right.
Why is it not converting?
Because people just don't care. Like, they're there to get their problem. They're there to get their problem solved, not to listen to your story. But story is also important because we want to connect. Like, we want to be able to connect. We have to be able to connect with the audience. But what I find is when you do your teachings, and this is what we had you do, is when you do your teachings, you can back up the teachings or show proof of the teachings through your story. So if you're going to say, like, um, for for example, if you talk about how you don't want to close people while they're working out, I don't know, I'm just making something up, right? Like, don't try to close people on a membership while they're in the middle of their workout. And then you could now say, like, look, I worked in the gym for 11 years as a personal trainer, working Monday through Saturday, morning till night. And what I realized is that most of my sales actually came from when people were done with their workout, not in the middle. It's like, okay, great. So we just told part of your story. We got a little bit in there. They were able to connect and relate to you, but it also served the second purpose, which is it backed up your teaching. It proved that what you just taught them was true. So now the trust level also goes up. And if you do it right, you can actually tell your entire story throughout a 3-day presentation, but you're just doing it in little chunks but now it serves multiple purposes, and you're not droning on and on and on for 15 minutes in the beginning of the presentation, because the beginning of your workshops, the beginning of your webinar, that's where you need to hook someone in. And so we need every juicy little thing that we can get to hook people in, and then use the story strategically so that it has multiple benefits instead of just throwing it all in the beginning.
Yeah. No, that was definitely a huge shift for me. And now it's funny because now I pick up on when other people do it
Yeah.
and my eyes just gloss over, right? I'm like, I don't need to know all this.
Yeah.
So we talked about lead gen, phase 1, phase 2. This is where a lot of my students are currently having trouble getting people to show up to stuff, like show up rate, getting people to, and I know, and they're doing all the traditional stuff like show up bonuses, email reminders, SMS reminders, right? Like, so how do you use messaging to potentially really increase people's internal desire to show up? Because most people are just going, well, I'll sign up for it, I'll grab the replays, right? And we know how that ends. So how can you get people to actually show up live?
So what I find is the more relevant it is to their current circumstance, and the more painful the problem is, the more likely they are to show up. So, you can find all these different problems that people have, but the one that's the biggest one, the most painful, they'll show up to more. But if you can cater that title to be more relevant to them and their situation, the likelihood they're going to show up goes through the roof. You can also combine that. I'll give a little strategy piece here too. One of the things that we like doing is, and we've done this in the past, is that when people register for a webinar, we tell them there's going to be no replay. So no replay. However, we pitch like a $7 or $10 or 27.40, whatever, some low ticket offer that says, however, if you guys want to upgrade to the VIP experience of this webinar, we're going to give you a replay that you have for the rest of your life, and we're going to do a bonus Q&A call tomorrow after the day after the webinar. And so now that we have this strategy in place where people feel like I need to show up live or I need to pay, what happens is when they pay, you actually get a lot of your ad spend back. So it could pay for all your ad spend, it could cut your ad spend in half. But what it also can do for the people that don't buy is it increases show up rate. Now, if you combine that strategy with a really effective title that has their identity, the very specific problem, you might have a really good without statement. So you say without doing the thing that you hate doing, right? In there. And then you have some really strategic emails, follow-ups, which I'll talk about in a second. We've seen boost in show up rates because of that. The emails that work really well are just small little ones, like little ones that says, hey, Susie, if you registered for the webinar, I'm sure you've probably had this very specific problem. Now, the fact that you registered shows me that you probably haven't figured it out. If you're actually serious about figuring it out, make sure you're live, book it on the calendar. And if you haven't upgraded to VIP, if you can't make it for time's sake, like go buy VIP right now. It's like these short little to the point, I understand you, getting you to recognize you do have this problem, show up live. These little things, instead of these long drawn out emails, just do a lot better because it makes them feel heard. You're speaking directly to them, and it's short. Like they can glance at it and get the whole thing right then and there.
Then you reiterate the problem and you get them to identify again as like, hey, because you raised your hand to be on this, I'm going to assume that you need this information. I always appeal, and I'd be interested in you. One thing has really worked for us. So this one time, I don't know, this maybe like 2 years ago, we were launching, and I don't know why I just thought people would show up. Like this is before we really started putting effort into it. This is where obviously we started using a lot more paid traffic, and it was like a 4% show up rate, and I was like, whoops. And then like the very next one, we went to 14% on our first of 3 calls, which was really great. And we implemented a lot of the message was in the Facebook group ahead of time. So we kind of started talking about the first training of the 3 trainings as like a red carpet event. Like I started being like, hey guys, let's get ready for the red carpet event. I'd be like, because I work with a lot of moms. So I was like, talk to whoever you need to talk to get the hour to yourself, like close the door, get the kids. And a lot of the women were like, oh yeah, I didn't even think about it. I talked to my husband and he's fine making dinner that night. Like
Yeah,
it was just like this thing that opened up this whole idea of like, I was kind of appealing to self-care, to be honest. I was like, look, this is for you. This is like self-care for you. It was like, you wanted to do this, take the hour. And we ended up, so from that messaging ended up working really well. And we do
that's
RSVPs
amazing.
and stuff like that. So it worked really well.
Yeah, and we do, like when we have our big launches, we do the same thing, which is like the event that we have coming up is March 17th. So inside our Facebook group, every day it's like hitting the March 17th, day one, March 17th. So you create this event. It's like a movie premiere. Like when movies first get released, everyone knows the date that it comes out and they get this big burst of people coming in. So that works. We've done that too. It works really, really well.
Okay, so now we got them showing up. We got them in. We got them. The leads are there. They're showing up. They're excited to show up. And then I don't know, let's say that a lot of my students will do challenges or they do single workshops or multi-part workshops. What are you personally seeing convert the best? Or if there's not one single sales mechanism that's working the best, what would be a sort of template of how you would walk people through the messaging within the sales mechanism?
Yeah. I mean, we've seen all sorts of sale mechanisms work. And I think it really depends on price point. Like if you sell a $27 thing, it's like membership, it's you don't need a big long
You
drawn
don't need
out thing.
three-part training. Yeah.
Right. But if you have like 1,000, 500, 3,000, you probably do. So it'll change and vary. And then obviously being in the fitness space, challenges work a lot better for someone that versus someone that's in my industry or whatever. So it can shift and change. But regardless of what you do, the framework that I like to use right in the beginning is just hook them in real quick. So it is using, just reiterate the title and the promise. So a good promise will have a couple elements to it. A good promise for a webinar or a training or a 3-day event will have it'll have social proof included into it, but it'll also have end result, but it's also something tangible. And what I mean by tangible is you can look the person in the eyes and go, did I deliver on what I promised? And it's a yes or no. So it's like, discover my 3-step process that has allowed 1,000 students to generate over $100 million online, right? So that's a social proof, 1,000 students, 1 million online, but it's also a 3-step process. So at the end, I can say, did I deliver a 3-step process to you? And it's yes or no. So that's a really good promise. So when you combine that title with the promise, and you just start off like, hey guys, today we're going to teach you this title and we're going to deliver on this one promise. You're going to see all of these big results. Now look, this isn't just me seeing these results. We've also gotten results for Susie. And then we go right into case studies, testimonials. And then right off the bat after that, we move, that's phase 1. Phase 2 is we move into what I call the diagnosis stage. And the diagnosis stage is just basically using the same elements we talked about so far on the call, which is like, what are the very specific problems? Why are those problems existing? What have they done to try to fix those problems that hadn't worked? And so what I like to do is say, look, if you're here, you're probably here because you're experiencing 5 different things, or one of these 5 or maybe more. And I go through this problem, this problem, this problem, this problem. And then I get them to say like, yes, who has that? And then I say, if you've done this, how many of you have tried this, 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 and this, and it didn't work? And how many of you have been doing this, this, and this? Did you guys know this is actually causing the problem? So if you nail that right in the beginning of the webinar, instead of telling your story, what we do is we now got them in a place where they're like, this person nailed it. They understand me. They get me. And they get really excited and hooked for the webinar. And then that's when we present the solution. Here's the solution. And I'm willing to bet you guys haven't tried this yet. And then we back up the solution with a story, metaphor, an analogy, so that their mind automatically goes, oh my God, this is the solution I need. Now we have them right in the right place where we want them when we start teaching. And if you just follow that process with the teaching, where it's like, I'm going to teach a concept, I'm going to back it up, I'm going to talk about some of the problems that can happen that you might be experiencing, this step is going to fix, and you do that through the rest of your webinar, by the time you get to the pitch, they should already be sold. Like they should be just like, I know I need to work with this person. But then when you combine that with a really good pitch, it's just game over by that point. So the 4 points would be hook, diagnosis, teaching, and creating demand at the same time, and then pitch. And that's basically how I like to structure whether it be webinar, challenge, 3-day event, they're all structured the same.
I love it. It's so different than 5 years ago, where it's like 20-minute story, tell me story, 60 minutes of teaching, and then 5-minute pitch.
Right. Yeah,
So,
exactly.
yes, this is a lot different. Okay. I love this. And then are you doing anything specific during Card Open? One of the things that I remember you telling me, and I was like, but you were like, once you're selling, no more teaching. No more teaching. You've already taught. What are you doing during Card Open? Because I think sometimes a lot of our students, they're in Card Open's the hardest part for them, because they're like, I'm not making sales every minute, right? And it's this feeling of like, what did I go wrong? And then they message me and they're like, any other tips, right? And I'm like,
Yeah.
keep going. So
Yeah.
what are you telling people during Card Open? What's the big dial movers?
So you're right. It's like when card is open, teaching is done. And it's all about helping them make a decision. And whether that is to not invest with you or to invest with you. So a lot of great things to be doing inside your Facebook group, if you have one, via email or whatever it is you're doing. There's a couple major things. Like social proof is an obvious one, right? You want your case studies, your testimonials. Q&A, like frequently asked questions, are really good, but objection busting content is really good. So what I mean by objection busting content is if you know time is going to be one of the biggest objections, like I just don't have enough time, you might want to consider doing a live inside of the group talking about, hey, here are the top 3 things that people use that are actually going to stop them from getting the result you want. So here's the top 3 things trainers are going to use that are going to stop them from making more revenue. And really all you're going to do is use their excuses against them. So it'd be like, number one, they tell themselves they don't have enough time. Number two, they tell themselves they don't have enough money. Number three, they don't have. So it's going to feel like teaching, but really what it is it's helping them make a decision. It's helping them get them out of their fears, out of their worries, all of these things. So you have to start thinking through like, well, what do I need to do to get them off the fence? And how do I start to incorporate this in a cart open? So those are like the top ones that I like to go through. So objection busting content, social proof. There could be strategic things like adding in bonuses or payment plans and different things like that. Q&A calls. What we also like to do is bring on and do student panels. So students come in and talk about their experience as well, where they were before coming into our program, where they were after, what their biggest ahas were. These things we love to do just to create an amazing experience to help people just make a better, more informed decision. We also do a lot of sales calls. So we're pitching sales calls all the time, but they're really at that point is just, there's no more teaching. Like the teaching's done. It's over. It's gone.
So even when you say like it's still value for me to, I forget, James calls it model of the world. People who have success do this. People who continue to struggle do this.
Right.
And so, but you frame it up like, hey, these are the three biggest obstacles that most people face when they're trying to build a business. Number one, they don't invest themselves. Number two, they don't create the time. Number three, they have to get ready, or whatever it is. So, okay, cool. I love that because I think we want to create more solutions to prove that we are smart. We still want to prove we're smart, see how much I can do for you. But you're saying, let's just force them to make a decision. And the decision can be no, but we want to give them all the information.
Yeah. And it's just to help them get out of the fear. Cause that's usually that's the biggest thing stopping them. Like if we did our job right, they should trust our process. And if you ask them, like, do you trust me? And do you trust my process to bring you results? If you did your job right, the answer is going to be yes. Then the next thing is do you trust yourself? And the answer almost is always no. And so if you can help them make the decision to trust themselves, the more sales you're going to make.
That is definitely the hardest one for sure.
Yeah.
Especially because, and I'm sure you're seeing this as well, but more and more people are coming in having bad experiences with other coaches, which, when I started, I was a lot of times people's very first coach. They were like scared to give their credit card over the internet. It's like back in 2010. And now more people are coming in and going, God, I'm still paying that business coach the $12,000 that I, did like 5 months ago. And I still haven't gotten the result on that. So to your point, it's like, how do we still overcome that objection? So I love that you pointed that out. And that's kind of nice. I don't have to keep teaching. I can just be like, look, make the decision. Even if the decision is no, just the call to action, the prompting, and the promotion. Love that.
Yeah, all those things that work really well. And it's like some really important questions that I think would be very beneficial, regardless of the industry that you're in, is number one, I always love the question, do you trust me? Number two, do you trust my process? And if you do trust me and you trust my process, then what's the hang up? And then they say, well, I don't trust myself. And I'll say, then why are you still trying? Because if you don't trust yourself to get the results, why don't you just quit? And most of them are like, well, I don't want to, I want the results. And it's like, so what are you going to do? Are you going to continue to try to do it on your own because you're too afraid to invest in another coach? Or are you going to take the chance on someone that you trust and a process that you trust to get you the results that you want? And so this is like, for me, this is like a thing that I'll do on the last day is have like a real heart to heart. I call it tough love Brandon, who just comes in and is like, this is the reality of the situation. And you get them to a point where it's like, if you're not going to like get over the fact that you got burned in the past, then why, like, why are we still here? What are we still doing? You know what I mean? So these sort of things are really great. Obviously cater that conversation to your personality. Like I don't mind being polarizing and a hard ass at times and giving that tough love when I need to. Some people like to be a little softer about it and that's fine too. But if you can find your vibe or your personality come through in that direction, it does really well on a final day. Storytelling is also very good. So like, if you really want to tell your story, don't do it in the webinar, do it here. Like last day number 2, like our final day, like here's where I was, I can relate to where you guys were. Here's the decisions I had to make. You have a really tough decision on here's how it turned out for me when I made the decision. Like that type of story does really well too.
Yeah, no, I love that. Yeah, tough love, Brandon. I mean, we're both Enneagram 8s, so we were like, I like don't know how to not tell it how it is. Like it
Yeah.
is. Like sugar off the pot.
Yeah.
Totally love that. Well, I definitely want to respect your time. I would love to hear a little bit more about Master Your Conversion Messaging, which is your free experience coming up, which everyone's going to join because they need it. I'm sure you guys listening are like, yes, yes, Jill, I need this. Y'all, it's free. So link in the show notes, but tell me a little bit about what exactly, let's talk about the promise. What are they going to learn out of it?
So we're just going to teach you conversion, like the entire thing of conversion messaging. And everything that we talked about today. So if you're like, Brandon, I understand this sounds great, I want to see it live in action, I would just show up for 3 days just to see me live in action, because I'm
Yes.
literally going to do everything that I just talked about today. Not only am I going to do it, but you're going to know I'm doing it, and you're still going to feel how effective it is. That's the power in what I'm teaching you to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to show you how to get very clear on the specific problems, the specific mistakes. We're going to talk about how to translate that into titles, translate that into content, and then how to create really powerful trainings that actually add value, but get people to convert. So anytime I go into a launch, like sometimes our launches will do over $1 million, but we'll do like 200 grand before cart even opens, because people are literally knocking down our door saying, I need to get in. I want you to have that same experience. And if you come to the 3-day event, we're going to show you the concepts of how to make that start. So if that's something that's interesting to you, well, make sure you sign up, because we're going to dive through all of it.
And I just want to reiterate that if you're listening to this, you guys, like what's going to be really cool, especially now that you've listened to this podcast a good amount, maybe you're in FBA with me, maybe you're in another container, like I want you guys to look at it from the business lens, right? Like stop being the consumer and being like, oh, like being at the whim of, I want you guys to actually watch what Brandon does on these trainings and be like, oh, there's the analogies. Oh, there's the stories. And you're going to see just how much you need this in your own launches, and you need this in your own social media, you need this in your own ad and lead gen and everything that you're doing. And so I'm going to go ahead and pitch it because I actually have purchased the course. But you guys are going to go through the tree trainings. Of course, Brandon's going to pitch you on his signature offer. And I want you guys to get in it because it is the absolute game changer. So all of that, if you guys have any questions about this, let me know. I have purchased Brandon's course, and I've also worked with him one-on-one. And this is the second time that we've had him on the podcast. So y'all, like, this is a guy I trust. I want you guys to go and experience him for yourself. So thank you so much for being here. This was I'm excited. Like selfishly, I got all my questions answered about like, yo, my students are struggling with show up rate. Brandon, what do you think they should do? And so thank you for being here. It's always just so great to hear you do your thing and then do it in real time so people can see exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah. Well, I'm just grateful for the opportunity to talk to your peeps, and I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, you know what to do. Link in the show notes. Let me know if you need anything else, and we'll see you on the next episode. Bye, guys.